Hi, I'm Harry and I work for Heart of Wales Bikes, and I'm about to start a PDI, a Pre-Dispatch Inspection sheet. This is our workshop where we carry out all bike maintenance. Today I'm working on a Rally Tundra, and basically with the PDI sheet we start off with sort of the most basic. First thing we check is the frame condition, checking it for corrosion and signs of distortion. This is the bottom bracket where we look for corrosion. You want to check underneath here because it's part of the bike which can get knocked quite easily. Also with tightening up the bottom bracket, sometimes that can cause splits to occur, but it all looks absolutely fine. Next up is hubs running smooth with quick release skewers. Hubs running true is basically checking that it goes round easy enough, it continues going round, so it's not being, none of the ball bearings are loose inside and popping out of place and causing friction. And you can also feel by moving it around that there's no clunks, there's no bearings out of place basically. Then to check that the nuts are secure, you get spanners on here, make sure that they're tight, loosen them off is often a good idea, and pull them up so that they're definitely right in the frame and securely in, and then tighten back down again. Also checking that there's no spacers missing, so that basically the nuts on the inside are exactly the same width as the frame, so the frame doesn't have to bend to fit the wheel. Wheels true and spokes satisfactorily tight. Now we're checking to see if the wheel is true and if the spokes are tight. With this one I can tell that the wheel definitely isn't true because the brakes are binding on it when at part of its cycle, so I know that the rim is not true. Then checking the spokes, I can feel they're a little bit loose just by feeling them, but we can check them further by using a spoke table. Right, now we need to measure the spoke. This one is 2mm and it's not butted, so it's the same thickness throughout the length of it. Now that we know that it's a 2mm spoke, we can look at our table here, and following down the 2mm we can see exactly what sort of strain it should be under. Then using this tool here, which we slip around the spoke, and then it measures the tension here. So this one here is about 16. 16 is just below where it needs to be. It needs to be between 16 and 29. So these spokes are a bit loose. So I'll go around and check more of the spokes around the wheel. Okay, I've put the wheel in the stand, and now I'm going to spin it and listen out for a sound. The sound is coming from these here, which you bring into as close as possible. You want to try and get the wheel so that it's true within a few millimetres. There's points where it's rubbing on this side here. So what I'll do is I'll slowly move it round. There's the bulge where it's not hitting, and there's where it is. So then I'll use a spoke spanner, find the points where it's rubbing worst, and then tighten the spokes on the side which it needs to be pulled over to. The spokes pull either way and they alternate each way. Rim and braking surface to make sure that both are in good condition and that neither is near wearing out. So now we're checking that the brakes don't rub at all, there's no noise of them rubbing at all there. The wheel still looks like it's moving a little bit, but I think that's actually down to the tread of the tyre rather than the actual rim itself. So now just check the brakes. Snap on very well, they release well, there's very little space between the brakes and the rim at all time, but it's not rubbing, so they're absolutely fine. Tyres in sound condition, checking for cracks and corrosion on the tyres and also checking that they're up to the pressure that they should be. Now we're checking the tyres, checking their pressure, but also checking that the rubber hasn't perished at all. With this tyre there's cracks opened up as I've pumped the tyre up, so it's not so bad that I'll instantly remove the tyre, but I'll get in touch with the customer and say that your tyre may need replacing in some time and point out that there are cracks appearing in the rubber. Then we move on to the handlebar controls and plug ends, so checking that everything's tightened down there and in the right position and in a comfortable position to use. Okay, when inflating your tyre, it's always worth first of all checking that the tyre is well seated in the rim, that it's not bulging out at any point. Then you need to check what pressure to inflate it to. On the side of the tyre, it should have the size of it on one side and then the pressure to inflate to on the other. This one here says inflate to 40 to 65 pounds per square inch. Inspect the cable inners and outers, so that's checking that all the cables are running smoothly, are greased, that they're not frayed. Okay, next up we're checking the cables, making sure that the cable tidies are on the end and that the cables aren't frayed. To do that you want to check the cable right throughout its journey where it's exposed, wherever you can see it, pulling the cable through and looking for signs of corrosion or distortion, trying to check if there's enough grease in there, feeling how smoothly they feel like they're running. This one here doesn't have a tidy on the end and is frayed, so I'm going to try, instead of having to replace the whole wire, I'm going to try cutting it down a bit. Probably around about there. A pair of pliers on it and trying to twist it up. And then one press, lock it on there. Brake mounting, so that's making sure that the brakes themselves are actually mounted onto the bike securely, so that when you brake, the stress and strain is passed through the frame rather than the brakes flying off. Now we're going to check that the brakes themselves are fixed to the frame correctly and securely. So for that, we'll just put this in there, and I can feel that that's well locked down. There's no play at all. So now we know that these are solidly fixed to the pegs. Handlebar control secured and plugs in the end of the bars. Okay, now we're doing the handlebar controls, making sure that they're all fixed down to the handlebars tightly. So with that, you can feel whether something's loose or not. But it's always worth putting the correct size Allen key in and just giving it a little bit of a tighten up. Now you just have to check that the handlebar clamp is secure, so the handlebar itself can't slip and slide anywhere. And that's well locked down. Making sure that there's sufficient brake material, so to make sure that the pads themselves have still got enough rubber on them and you're not rubbing through into the metal of the pad itself. And make sure they're not binding or rubbing as well, so if a wheel isn't true or if the brakes are slightly too tight, it can cause heat to build up and can damage your rims or the tyres themselves, or the brakes can lock on, which is also dangerous. We're now checking to see if there's sufficient braking material and to make sure that it's not binding or rubbing. There's fairly new brake pads on this bike, so I'm not very worried about those, but it's always worth having a look at the rim of the bike. You want to check that it hasn't been worn down by the brake pads, and you can tell this by whether or not it's smooth across. If there's a big dip in it, that means that the chances are that the walls of your rim have been rubbed and the rim may need replacing. But with this one it's absolutely fine, and there's absolutely no rubbing or noise coming from it as the wheel rotates. Brake lever travel, so you're trying to get it so that both the brake levers are travelling a similar distance to give the same sort of braking capacity to each one. We're now checking the brake lever travel. On the front brake here you can see there's very little movement at all. The brakes come on very quickly, which is what you want. On the rear brake here there's a lot more movement. Okay, by using the barrel adjuster and by sliding the excess cable through the brake at the back, I've now managed to get it so that the pull is not so much as it was. Derailleur mounting bolts and pinch bolts, make sure they're torqued, so it's the same as with brakes. You want to make sure that they're fixed to the bike firmly. Now we're checking that the derailleur is mounted correctly. With this one there's a hanger, so first of all I'll check that the hanger is definitely done up tight. And that one is. And then the actual hanger itself here, and that needed tightening up a bit. So now I know that that's secure. We'll also do the same for the front derailleur. We do a visual inspection of the chain to make sure that it's not stretched and make sure that it's not in any danger of snapping. Gears correctly adjusted. We have to run through the gears to make sure that all gears are accessible. Right, we're now going to check the gears. So I'll start with the rear cassette first and run up through the gears, making sure that it goes neatly into each one and there's no skipping as it is doing there. And also making sure that the limit screws are definitely correct, so that the fact that it's not going to throw the chain off into the spokes or the other side. And now the front. Which all seems to be working quite well. Probably what would be a good idea is to oil the chain at this point as well. Pedals tight and free of play, basically making sure that the pedals are completely smoothly running so that your feet are able to stay on them throughout your bike ride and that there's no chance of them slipping out from underneath you, locking up or coming off. Now we're going to be checking that the pedals are on tight and are free of play. So we just check that they're on nice and tight with a good wrench, and then we check if they're free of play. With these I can feel a minuscule amount of play, but they are quite cheap plastic pedals, so that's sort of to be expected. It's not to the point where you can feel any bearings slipping out of place and that they don't rotate freely, so that's fine. The seat pin and saddle free of play, once again just making sure that everything's tightened down so that it's all secure so that it can take your weight and nothing shifts while you're cycling. Now we're going to check that the saddle is free of play as well. So what we'll do is pop that in there, make sure that's good and tight down, and check to see if there's any movement at all. There still is a little bit of movement in there actually. There you go, that should do it. And with this one, there is likely to be a tiny bit of play in the stem because it's a suspension stem. So it's got a slight spring in it to take the bumps out. But yeah, that's all good. Headset rotating free with no play. So tightening down headsets is something you have to do a lot, replacing bearings and making sure that all the internal bits of it are all working correctly. Okay, now we're checking the headset to make sure that it's free of play and that it's all locked down tight. So it's able to rotate. I can't feel any crunching, any ball bearings moving around. It's very, very smooth. Then also want to check the movement. Just make sure that there's actually no movement there. A good way to check this also is once you get the bike off the stand, put the front brake on and to rock the bike backwards and forwards. Now we're going to go outside, take the bike and give it a ride and check that everything's working. Okay, now we're going to test ride the bike, so I'm going to shift through all the gears, I'm going to test the brakes out and see if there's any rattles or squeaks that I can't account for. I've taken the bike out for a ride and it all seems like it's working fine. There's no unaccounted rattles or squeaks, the brakes work, the gears work, it's ready to go. So that's how we do a PDI. Thanks a lot for watching. You can come in and see us in store, or you can find us on www.heartofwellbikes.com.